Well, hello! Today we're going to talk about Quid Sit. Quid Sit is the middle or second section of a judicial essay. If you remember, yesterday we did and sit, which takes into account the evidence, physical objects, documents, testimony of eyewitnesses, testimony of expert witnesses. It evaluates the reliability of the physical evidence and how it was gathered, and it also evaluates the credibility of the eyewitnesses and the sources of the evidence. So ANSIT is about proof, and it has to do with, did it happen? It answers the question, did it happen? Okay? Quid Sit is a little different. Quid Sit is more about the act itself. Okay? And so the first thing that we're going to take into consideration with Quid Sit is the charge. And the question we're going to ask is, what specifically did the defendant do? What did she do? What exactly is she being accused of? And so the key words that I like to put with Quid Sit are the words define and describe. So here you're going to define what is the actual charge, and then you're going to describe it. And so our charge is that Fanny went to the opera. But you know our charge is a little bit more than that. Actually, what we're accusing her of doing is disobeying her father, right? Because he told her that that wasn't a good place to spend time, and that the boys that she was hanging out with, he didn't want her hanging out with them. And she knew that, and she did it anyway. So that's our specific charge, and that's how I would define it, and that's how I would describe it. Someone else might accuse her a little differently. They might accuse her of leading on Frank Morse, okay? And that's a different charge. But they can put exactly into words what it is she did that was wrong, okay? So then the second thing is, what law was violated? Okay, the next thing we want to consider is what law was violated. And we need to define and describe that too. So one of the things we want to define is, was it a government law? Like if Fanny had set fire to the opera house, or if she'd been stealing things out of people's purses, right? That would be violating a government law. Was it a higher moral law? Was the law that she violated, did she tell lies? Did she, what's a higher moral law? Well, stealing falls under that too. Was it a cultural law? Is it cultural to obey your father in the time period when this book was written? Absolutely. And you might argue that it was moral too, but it certainly wasn't a government law. Or was it a higher natural law? And what is it, a written or unwritten law? So we're going to define what law was violated. And here I'm going to say moral or cultural, and it's unwritten. But, so you're going to have to describe that and explain that in this time period, it's widely accepted that people obey their father. Their father provides for them. I think this book was written in the 50s, but I'm not totally sure. So then the third thing that you're going to do is you're going to establish, you're going to talk about what harm was suffered. So first you're going to define who was harmed. Was it an individual? In this case, was it Fanny's father that was harmed? Was it Frank Morse that was harmed? Was it a subgroup or a whole community? Has Fanny harmed all young teenage girls everywhere because now they'll never be allowed to go to the opera? Individual, subgroup, or community? Oh, I know what you have to do next. Then you have to establish the extent and the type of the harm. I can't remember how to spell extent. Oh, it is indeed. So, was it physical harm? No. Was it Mental harm? Perhaps. Or was it emotional harm? So I would say for our example that Fanny's father suffered harm because he was disrespected and disobeyed. Fanny suffered harm because she had the bad influence of the people she was hanging out with. And the guy Frank and Mr. Sidney that she hung out with suffered harm because she didn't treat them correctly. But I would classify all of it probably as emotional harm. And you can see why this is so important to define and describe the charge, the law violated, and the harm suffered, because every wrong action or right action isn't exactly the same. If she had been charged with physically assaulting someone, you can see that the harm suffered would be considered more severe, the law violated would be considered more serious, and so the charge would be more serious. This can really help a person who's trying to decide if someone has done something wrong, but also it helps to establish the degree of response, right? Because you don't respond the same. If Joseph really had assaulted Potiphar's wife, the response shouldn't be the same as if Fanny disobeyed her father and went to the opera, right? There's degrees. God is a personal God, and he has a plan to restore justice, and it's based on degree too. Once he's figured out if something's right or wrong, he doesn't respond automatically the same to everyone, and neither should we. And so this quid sit is a very important part of establishing or evaluating a past action. Not just to decide if it was right or wrong, but to determine what response is needed and how severe and strong does the response need to be to restore justice to the situation, if that's possible. And that's quid sit. It's all about the act itself. All right, I just want to make a couple more connections before I sign off for today. I want you to see how some things are related to each other. I think you can see that quid sit could be a whole essay in and of itself, right? With the topic of the act, or how serious is the charge. The first proof paragraph could be all about the charge. The second one, all about the law that was violated. And the third paragraph could be all about the harm that was suffered, right? So you could have 3 essays, an and sit essay, a quid sit essay, and a quail sit essay, all about the same issue or evaluating the same past action. That's not how we're going to handle it, though. We're going to handle it as a paragraph. And so you can see that quid sit, the act, is sort of the topic sentence of our paragraph, and these are what we use to support or illustrate our points. So we're just going to have a briefer synopsis of the issue. But when you're doing the invention process, I want you to just invent as if you were writing a whole essay, okay? And generate as many ideas, fill your inventory with as many ideas as you can related to these very specifically laid out topics. There's 2 things that are going to influence then which ones you choose to have the very best essay. And the first one is, which side did you take? For example, if you don't think it was wrong for Fanny to go to the opera, you are going to choose different information, and you're trying to convince her dad of that. You're going to choose different information than you would if you thought what she did was wrong. So that's the first thing. The second thing is consider your audience. You're going to use different information if you're trying to convince Fanny's father than if you're trying to convince me, right? Or your parents or Fanny's peers. And so always consider audience. And if you were writing this to your parents, an example would be, your parents have all bought into the Bible. So you could say that the law violated was moral and that it's written in the 10 Commandments that you shouldn't disobey your parents. And that would be very persuasive to your parents. However, that would not be very persuasive to Fanny's father, because we haven't seen any signs that he's a man of faith or that that would be persuasive to him. So the things that might help you decide if something's right or wrong are not necessarily the things you would use to persuade someone else to see things in the serious nature or in the point of view that you see them. So remember, consider your audience and consider which side of the charge you're going to take. Have you decided they shouldn't do something or that they should do something? That should very much influence which things you pick as the best things to include. Okay? I hope that's helpful. Remember, please write in third person, and please write about issue evaluating a past action from the literary work To Kill a Mockingbird.